Dr. Terrilyn R. Battle is a licensed clinical mental health counselor associate in North Carolina, a licensed clinical addiction specialist associate in North Carolina, and a licensed associate counselor in the state of New Jersey. She is also a national certified counselor, certified rehabilitation counselor, and certified vocational evaluator, and holds a Ph.D. in rehabilitation counseling and counselor education. Through her experience as a CRC, Dr. Battle has acquired experience working with transition-aged youth with disabilities and adults with disabilities to become gainfully employed through federal, state vocational rehabilitation services and support. Additionally, throughout her career, Dr. Battle has gained experience providing counseling support to individuals with mental health diagnoses and substance use disorders. Dr. Battle holds interests in researching areas of cultural immersion and multiculturalism, employability among underrepresented populations, and imposter phenomenon, and the implications of mentorship to challenge the imposter feelings that come up for so many high-achieving individuals. Dr. Battle, we're so incredibly honored to have you join us here today, and at this point, the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. I am very happy to be talking about this topic because it is very near and dear to me through my own experiences of imposter phenomenon, as well as hearing the narratives of many of my clients, many of my students that I teach, and just feel like it's an overall phenomenon or concept to be mindful of when we're providing support to individuals. So I'm going to share my screen so that you all can see the PowerPoint. All right, so a look beyond what you see, Unmasking the Impostor. And as I go through this, I'm probably going to share some insights of my own of how imposter phenomenon has shown up for me, because I think it's important to give some context as a professional looking at imposter phenomenon so much and seeing how it just intersects our lives so much. I'm currently doing a study where I'm looking at imposter phenomenon among first-time mothers, because the term momposter doesn't exist. So kind of coining that term, and also just being conscious of the fact that imposter phenomenon or imposter experiences or imposter syndrome could show up in areas that aren't high, that's not specifically focused on academics or career. So individuals that might not have that high achieving in terms of academics or careers, they still may experience imposter feelings. And how can we make meaning for that with our clients and other individuals that we interact with? So all right, so the learning objectives for today, we will discuss what imposter phenomenon is and the feelings that make one feel like an imposter. We will identify and discuss ways to challenge imposter phenomenon and feelings among individuals with disabilities and denounce the mask that may be present within our activities of daily living. And we will understand ways in which the imposter cycle impacts our well-being and ways to alleviate feelings of imposter phenomenon within rehabilitation counseling spaces. Okay, so this is something I want you to do. You can use your phone, you grab a sheet of paper, pencil, pen, your iPad, whatever you choose to use. And I want to prompt your reflection of yourself before we get into the topic of imposter phenomenon and understanding what the definition is and understanding how we can combat this phenomenon. I want us to be honest with ourselves. I'm going to go through the imposter scale with you all. It's 20 brief statements that I want you to take inventory of yourselves, be honest with it. Do not think too hard about the statements that I'm about to say. I want you to go with the first thought that comes to mind, okay? You will rank it by using 1, not at all true, 2, rarely, 3, sometimes, 4, often, or 5, very true. Okay, so I'm going to speed through them so that we'll have enough time for the other content and whatever questions may come up. But I will repeat if you all need me to, okay? So I have often succeeded on a test or task, even though I was afraid that I would not do well before I undertook the task. I can give the impression that I'm more competent than I really am. I avoid evaluations if possible and have a dread of others evaluating me. When people praise me for something I've accomplished, I'm afraid I won't be able to live up to their expectations of me in the future. I sometimes think I obtained my present position or gained my present success because I happened to be at the right place at the right time or knew the right people. I'm afraid people important to me may find out that I'm not as capable as they think I am. I tend to remember the incidents in which I have not done my best more than those times I have done my best. I rarely do a project or a task as well as I think to do it. Sometimes I feel or believe that my success in my life or in my job has been the result of some kind of error. It's hard for me to accept accomplishments or compliments or praise about my intelligence or accomplishments. At times, I feel my success has been due to some kind of luck. I'm disappointed at times in my present accomplishments and think I should have accomplished much more. Sometimes I'm afraid others will discover how much knowledge or ability I really lack. I'm often afraid I may fail at a new assignment or undertaking, even though I generally do well at what I attempt. When I've succeeded at something and received recognition for my accomplishments, I have doubts that I can keep repeating that success. If I receive a great deal of praise and recognition for something I've accomplished, I tend to discount the importance of what I've done. I often compare my ability to those around me and think they may be more intelligent than I am. I often worry about not succeeding with the project or examination, even though others around me have considerable confidence that I would do well. If I'm going to receive a promotion or gain recognition of some kind, I hesitate to tell others until it is an accomplished fact. I feel bad and discouraged if I'm not the best or at least very special in situations that involve achievement. So the next step in rating those statements is you would total your score. And if your score is 40 or less, you experience few imposter characteristics. If the score is between 41 and 60, you experience moderate imposter phenomenon experiences. A score between 61 and 80 reflect frequent imposter feelings. And a score higher than 80 means that you experience intense imposter feelings. So after taking that scale, I imagine at least one of the 20 questions or statements made you say, oh, no, wait, does this mean I'm an imposter? Doesn't necessarily mean that you're an imposter if you have one, but what if you answered, probably with a 4 or 5 with many of those components, but never really took a look at how this presence of feeling inadequate may be taking space in your life. So let's put some context to the definition of imposter phenomenon. Clance, who is the originator of the term imposter phenomenon, identified imposter phenomenon to reflect that oftentimes it occurs among individuals who present as high achieving and successful people. Imposters believe they are intellectual frauds who have attained success because they were at the right place at the right time, knew someone in power, or simply were hard workers, never because they were talented or intelligent or deserved their positions. Slank identifies imposter phenomenon by noting that it's a phenomenon of feeling like a fraud and like your successes aren't really yours. It's typically construed not just a crisis of confidence, but as a failure of rationality. The National Institutes of Health notes that imposter syndrome is a behavioral health phenomenon described as self-doubt, of intellect, skills, or accomplishments among high-achieving individuals. This last definition has spoke volumes for me within the last few weeks in terms of what imposter phenomenon shows up as. Okay, so it states that by Chris, she says that imposter phenomenon or imposter syndrome speaks to your inner fear and feeds your doubt. It questions your sanity and confidence. It tells you that you're not good enough, that everyone else has it figured out, and that you should just quit. So I'm really big on TED Talks, and I love to use videos, YouTube videos, TED Talks, Sprout videos to shape the context of whatever construct I'm looking at. I find that to be very beneficial within the clinical space with my clients as psychoeducation. And I find it to be very beneficial for my students as well, because it kind of shifts their meaning making to seeing a broader perspective of what an event is or a phenomenon is. So I'm going to play this video. If any questions or any thoughts come up, I would encourage you all to write them down so that we could talk about it at the end of the presentation, because we're going to have this video and then we're going to have another video towards the end talking about imposter phenomenon. So I'm going to play it and then write down your thoughts and we'll talk about it.
Even after writing 11 books and winning several prestigious awards, Maya Angelou couldn't escape the nagging doubt that she hadn't really earned her accomplishments. Albert Einstein experienced something similar. He described himself as an involuntary swindler whose work didn't deserve as much attention as it had received. Accomplishments at the level of Angelou's or Einstein's are rare, but their feeling of fraudulence is extremely common. Why can't so many of us shake feelings that we haven't earned our accomplishments, or that our ideas and skills aren't worthy of others' attention? Psychologist Pauline Rose Clance was the first to study this unwarranted sense of insecurity. In her work as a therapist, she noticed many of her undergraduate patients shared a concern. Though they had high grades, they didn't believe they deserved their spots at the university. Some even believed their acceptance had been an admissions error. While Clance knew these fears were unfounded, she could also remember feeling the exact same way in graduate school. She and her patients experienced something that goes by a number of names: imposter phenomenon, imposter experience, and imposter syndrome. Together with colleague Suzanne Imes, Clance first studied imposterism in female college students and faculty. Their work established pervasive feelings of fraudulence in this group. Since that first study, the same thing has been established across gender, race, age, and a huge range of occupations, though it may be more prevalent and disproportionately affect the experiences of underrepresented or disadvantaged groups. To call it a syndrome is to downplay how universal it is. It's not a disease or an abnormality, and it isn't necessarily tied to depression, anxiety, or self-esteem. Where do these feelings of fraudulence come from? People who are highly skilled or accomplished tend to think others are just as skilled. This can spiral into feelings that they don't deserve accolades and opportunities over other people. And as Angelou and Einstein experienced, there's often no threshold of accomplishment that puts these feelings to rest. Feelings of imposterism aren't restricted to highly skilled individuals either. Everyone is susceptible to a phenomenon known as pluralistic ignorance, where we each doubt ourselves privately, but believe we're alone in thinking that way because no one else voices their doubts. Since it's tough to really know how hard our peers work, how difficult they find certain tasks, or how much they doubt themselves, there's no easy way to dismiss feelings that we're less capable than the people around us. Intense feelings of imposterism can prevent people from sharing their great ideas or applying for jobs and programs where they'd excel. At least so far, the most surefire way to combat imposter syndrome is to talk about it. Many people suffering from imposter syndrome are afraid that if they ask about their performance, their fears will be confirmed. And even when they receive positive feedback, it often fails to ease feelings of fraudulence. But on the other hand, hearing that an advisor or mentor has experienced feelings of imposterism can help relieve those feelings. The same goes for peers. Even simply finding out there's a term for these feelings can be an incredible relief. Once you're aware of the phenomenon, you can combat your own imposter syndrome by collecting and revisiting positive feedback. One scientist who kept blaming herself for problems in her lab started to document the causes every time something went wrong. Eventually, she realized most of the problems came from equipment failure and came to recognize her own competence. We may never be able to banish these feelings entirely, but we can have open conversations about academic or professional challenges. With increasing awareness of how common these experiences are, perhaps we can feel freer to be frank about our feelings and build confidence in some simple truths. You have talent, you are capable, and you belong.
So I'll talk a little bit about my awareness of imposter phenomenon. So a few years ago, I was working as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. As a master level student, I had practicum experience in Statesville, North Carolina, and then I had experience in my internship at exposure and a site in Martinsville, Virginia. And then I started working after I concluded my studies in my master's program in the state of Maryland as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. And then I ended up going to Fairfax, Virginia, and then Alexandria, Virginia. That was my final stop. So while I was working with individuals, I started noticing something that kind of it prompted some desire to inform the field of rehabilitation counseling, but also being conscious of the need of mental health counseling and how they both intersect, at least for me in my practice, my belief system. And I grew an affinity to working with individuals who identified as homeless individuals accessing vocational rehabilitation supports. And I can recall being frustrated that I couldn't find someone eligible based on the fact that they did not have an address, a permanent address. That frustrated me. And I said, you know what? I want to do something. I always knew I wanted to teach, but how am I going to use this to inform the field? And I went to one of my coworkers and I said, hey, I have a question for you. She wasn't a vocational counselor, but she had been working there for some time. So she was immersed in the trenches of vocational rehab. So I asked her, I said, hey, do you think it would be beneficial for vocational rehab and mental health counseling in some way, shape, or form to be under the same entity and provide supports? And she said, oh yeah, that sounds beautiful. I think that'd be great, but that's not what we do here. You need to find them a job. And I was like, yeah, I understand that, but I'm just thinking about the full scope of things, right? The totality, the person as a whole, thinking of the whole person. Do you think it would be beneficial? She said, yes, Terrilyn, I think that's beneficial, but that's not what you do here. You need to find them a job. So I said, you know what? I'm going back to school. So I put in my note. Well, first I applied to a program, got accepted, put in my notice, started my journey as a doctoral student. So while I was in my first semester in my doc program, I'm sitting in class. I recognize I'm among a lot of high achievers. And this feels odd. So I had my years of exposure to vocational rehabilitation, but when I looked at my colleagues, it was 7 of us in the cohort. I was the youngest in the cohort. I also didn't have years of experience like they did. I had more than 5 years, but less than 10. So in my eyes, I was still a newbie. And they had years as clinical professionals, years in working in vocational rehab or having some kind of exposure to it. They've taught higher education for years. They had businesses as clinical mental health providers or working as supervisors. And I looked at myself and I was like, I can't measure up to this. Like, I don't belong here. I was doing extremely well in my classes. Oddly enough, statistics was one of my favorite classes. I was making 99s, 100s, and A's all on my assignments and tests, but I just still felt like I did not belong. And I can recall a test that we took and all of my peers got a question wrong, and they said, Terry, did you get that right? I said, yeah, we learned that in elementary school. Why? Yeah, I know that answer. And they were like, get out of our face, you don't know. So, but I was right. So I look at that and I'm like, I don't think that this is a good fit for me. So I went to one of my professors and I said, hey, I think I'm going to get out of the program. This has been sweet. I have enjoyed the process so far, but I don't think I belong here. And she said, yes, you do. And I said, no, I don't think so. I'm the youngest of four. I'm the youngest in this cohort. And I feel like I don't see where I can be beneficial to anyone in this regard, because I don't have the vast knowledge that everyone else has. And she said to me, she said, do you know what imposter phenomenon is? I said, never heard of it before. Can you tell me about it? And she said, no, I can't tell you about it, but I want you to go and do some research. I want you to come and tell me about it. So when I went home, I explored definitions of imposter phenomenon, and it changed my perspective of so many things. And I had to recognize that I was having these emotions, I was having these feelings, but how do I confront them? What does it look like to have these emotions or have these belief systems of discounting praise, or having a fear of the success that I could have, and finding peace in that, but not holding on to that narrative. So something I put in this PowerPoint, because I think it's very important for us to recognize when we talk about imposter phenomenon, are the potential characteristics of imposter phenomenon. With imposter phenomenon, we have the imposter cycle. Some individuals have the need to be special or be the very best at a task. We have the Superman, Superwoman aspect. We have fear of failure, denial of competence, and discounting praise. Fear of guilt about success. So when we look at the imposter cycle, this is something that I talk to my students, especially in pre-practicum, about oftentimes, because they come into the master's program, never into the master's program before, and they're having a hard time trying to become acclimated to the rigor of a graduate studies program. And they become frustrated at these new emotions that are coming up for them as they prepare to go into the field and provide counseling support to individuals, but feeling like they're not equipped to do that, feeling like a fraud, or like their client is going to find them out and call them out. So the imposter cycle, when an individual begins a project or a piece of work, those initial feelings that come up tend to reflect anxiety, doubt, or worry. And how we tend to cope with that is we over-prepare or become perfectionists, or we procrastinate. We take on that task, submit the task, or conclude the task, and then there's a sudden sense of relief. But that relief is short-lived, because we get positive feedback or some type of feedback, and then we instantly beat ourselves up or denounce the praise that we just received. So we push it away. Individuals that might over prepare or may be perfectionists, they look at it as, well, yeah, I should have had that. I should have gotten that grade, or I should have had that outcome because I worked my behind off to get this. I put in a lot of sweat and tears in this. So this hard work, I should have gotten this. But the procrastinator says, you know what? I threw that thing together at the last minute, and it's just luck that it turned out as well and it stuck. I'm glad they had grace, because that was just a rush job. So no matter what the feedback is, they discount their success of even getting the task done, having the accomplishment of getting the task done, even in the midst of anxiety or self-worry or doubt. And after that feedback has come, they begin to feel like a fraud. They have self-doubt. They may experience depression or have a sense of anxiety. And then that continues over and over again whenever an individual approaches a new task. When you start a new business, or you start a new semester at work, or you start a new grant project at work, or whatever the task or the piece of work or project may be, it continues to go. It's almost a loop. The need to be special. Imposters often secretly harbor the need to be the very best in comparison to others, and they dismiss their own talents or observe themselves as being stupid. The Superwoman, Superman aspect plants informs that this is the need to be the very best, having the Superwoman, Superman complex as interrelated. There's a perfectionistic tendency that is there, and there's an expectation that an individual will perform flawlessly in every aspect of their life. When applying this context, imposters oftentimes feel overwhelmed, disappointed, and overgeneralize themselves as failures when they are unable to fulfill their perfectionistic goals. Then we have the fear of failure. Imposters experience higher levels of anxiety when exposed to an achievement-related opportunity and or task because they fear possible failure. Making mistakes and or performing at the highest standard precipitates feelings of shame and humiliation, and the fear of failure becomes an underlying motive. Therefore, to reduce the potential failure, imposters will overwork themselves to be certain they will not fail. Denial of competence and discounting praise. Imposters have difficulty internalizing their success and accepting praise as valid. They attribute success to external factors and discount positive feedback. Fear and guilt about success is related to the negative consequences of their success, and they become overwhelmed by guilt about being different or worrying about being rejected by others. Dr. Valerie Young highlights 5 subgroups of imposter phenomenon: the perfectionist, the Superwoman, Superman, which we just saw, the natural genius, the soloist, and the expert. So when we focus on the perfectionist, it focuses on how something is done, including how the work is developed, conducted, and how it turns out. And if there's one minor flaw in a stellar performance, so if you're getting a 99 out of 100, 49 out of a 50-point evaluation, it equals shame and failure for that individual. The expert is the knowledge version of the perfectionist, where the primary concern is what and how much you can do. So individuals that reflect the expert, you expect to know everything, and even the slightest lack of knowledge evokes the feeling of fear and or shame for the individual. The soloist focuses on who completes the task. So you may solely focus on reaching a place of achievement by yourself. And because you think you need to do and figure out everything on your own, needing help is a sign of failure, which evokes shame. The natural genius cares about how and when accomplishments happens, and it focuses on the ease and the speed of the task that the individual is undertaking. So if you struggle to master a subject or a skill, or you're unable to bang out your masterpiece on the first try, you tend to have a sense of failure, and that evokes shame for the individual. The superhuman is based on how many roles the individual can juggle. So falling short in any role that intersects as manager, team member, parent, partner, friend, volunteer, any sense of falling short in any of these areas evokes shame, because they feel like they should be able to handle things perfectly and easily. All of those things. So this is a video by Valerie Young, and I'm probably going to play a little bit of it given the time. So she's the one who created the 5 subgroups of imposter phenomenon.
Have you ever had that I'm in over my head and they're going to find out feeling? Yeah. Maybe it was when you got a promotion, or you started a business, or you landed in a new role. Like the highly qualified administrator who couldn't believe they gave her the job. Once she got there, she found out the hiring committee had come directly from a wine function. And she said, aha, they were drunk. Or maybe you've said, if I can do it, how hard can it be? I actually heard a guy say, if I can get a Ph.D. in astrophysics from Caltech, anybody can. This tendency to discount or diminish obvious evidence of our abilities is called the imposter syndrome. The first time I heard the term, I was a 21-year-old doctoral student at the same university where my mom was working as a night janitor. I instantly identified, and so did the other students. As a matter of fact, we decided to start a little imposter support group. We started meeting and talking about being intellectual frauds and how we're fooling all of our professors. And everything went great for about 3 weeks. And that's about the time I started to have this nagging sense that even though everyone else was saying they were an imposter, it's like I knew I was the only real imposter. Decades later, and psychologists are still telling us that the way to overcome imposter syndrome is to just keep talking about it. The more we can talk about our supposed ineptness, the better we'll feel. I don't know, has anybody ever talked about how fat you feel? It's like, do you feel any thinner? Talking about imposter feelings is a start, but you can't share your way out of imposter syndrome. So what does work? Well, it begins by recognizing that people who really don't feel like imposters are no more intelligent or capable than you or I. That the only difference between them and us is they think different thoughts. That's it. Which is really good news because it means all we have to do is learn to think like a non-imposter. For example, the big difference between people who feel like imposters and people who don't is no one likes to fail, no one likes to make a mistake, no one likes to not know the answer or to have an off day or to struggle to master something. But when these things happen to imposters, we experience shame. Like the woman who was the head of a large medical center who said to me, I feel like an imposter because, quote, everyone else on the executive team is brilliantly articulate and I'm not. Now, there was a time when I would have said to her, oh, I'm sure you're brilliantly articulate. But now I know that wouldn't have served her. So instead I said, well, maybe you're not. Maybe you're not. And that's okay. She was thinking like an imposter. Non-imposters know they can't be brilliant at everything, and they're fine with that. The reason we have to pay attention to the conversation going on in our head is so we can reframe it the way a non-imposter would. My favorite reframe of all time came from Daniel Boone, the wilderness explorer, who said, I was never lost, but I was bewildered once for 3 days. That is a very good reframe. Somebody in serious need of a reframe was a friend of mine who was asked to put together a major presentation at the last minute. She nailed it. But all she could think of was, oh man, that was just a bunch of BS I threw together at the last minute. What's the reframe? How about, wow, how good am I that I can pull together information at the 11th hour that other people genuinely find useful? That last part is really important because it speaks to a contradiction in imposter logic. Because when you think about it, what we're really saying is other people are so stupid, they don't realize we're incompetent. So imagine if you had come up to my friend and said, that was great. And she looked at you and said, seriously? Wow. I mean, do you get out of the house much or what? Right? How arrogant and how absurd would that sound? What should she say in that situation? Yeah, thank you. Exactly. The thing about imposter syndrome is that it affects up to 70% of people. Not just high achievers, but it's a confidence issue for a lot of people. So for years, I would give people 10 ways to combat imposter syndrome. And then there was always that one person who would say, but is there anything else we can do? And I would say, well, of the 10 things I just gave you, what have you tried, right? Well, nothing, but is there anything else we can do? It took me a while, but I finally figured out what was happening. What they wanted was to walk in the room feeling like an imposter and walk out of the room not feeling like an imposter. And that's not how it works. In fact, feelings are the last to change. Do you want to stop feeling like an imposter? Then you have to stop thinking like an imposter.
So I'm going to stop it right there and keep going. So how can imposter feelings impact our well-being? Individuals who struggle with imposter feelings are more likely to experience anxiety and or depression. So there was a definition on that slide, the fourth one, the definition of imposter phenomenon, where Chris talks about just feeling like everyone is going to find them out, never being good enough. And Chris reflects Chesley Chris, the Miss USA pageant winner, who took her life in 2022, I believe, January 2022. Prior to her death, she decided to write a manuscript, tell her narrative of her experiences, what has led her to her law degree, what has led her to heartbreak, what has led her to seeking to be a pageant winner. And that was the definition. The reading her book was transformative for me in looking at how these definitions impact everyone on a global scale. So the reason I state that is because if you listen to news reports given by her mom or her family, they identified that Chesley struggled with severe depression, and no one who was outside of her most immediate or intimate relationships, they wouldn't have known. Only those who were very near and dear to her knew that. So in that manuscript, she asked her mom to publish this book so that people could have context of what it felt like for her to struggle with imposter feelings and to struggle with her own depression. And what she said was, I wish I could stay with you. And she's telling her mom this. I wish I could stay with you, but I cannot bear the crushing weight of persistent sadness, hopelessness, and loneliness any longer. I've never told you these feelings because I never wanted you to worry, and because I hoped they would eventually change, but I know they never will. They follow me through every accomplishment, success, family gathering, friendly dinner, and they are the loudest during my failures, setbacks, and heartbreaks. I fought against depression for a long time, but it's won this time around. What I was able to observe from her book was that she experienced unshakable feelings that she did not belong. She battled a constant inner voice repeating that she's never enough, and she felt that she had to be perfect because she had to represent for all youth, women, and Black people who also wanted to be in the room but had been denied access. And in addition to individuals having experiences of anxiety and or depression as a result of imposter feelings, this can also lead to lower self-esteem and false satisfaction. And it can also keep us from taking risks and putting ourselves out there to try new experience. And it'll keep us in a space of comfort and complacency. In looking at narratives of individuals with disabilities, I was able to see where some individuals stated that here lies the imposter phenomenon or imposter syndrome. I could walk, I could speak. Most of the time I can see and I can exist in many spaces where physically disabled individuals cannot. I feel I'm not well enough to be quote unquote normal, but don't look disabled enough to fit into that space either. It's like being in some sort of limbo existing between the binary. Holly, Life of a Blind Girl, states, disabled people find ourselves thinking, I don't want to seem difficult. I'm not disabled enough for that. Or if I mention my disability, it'll put an entirely different spin on it. While Zach Thompson states, just as we might doubt our abilities in our careers or other areas of life, I have definitely felt imposter syndrome when it comes to my disability. And I've had students tell me that, sometimes I feel like I'm not disabled enough, especially when I'm trying to get accommodations. I have to go through so many hoops to be supported in terms of this. So in these spaces that I take up with clients and students, I have to be aware of what imposter feelings may be looking like for them, hear their narratives, and acknowledge those imposter feelings and provide some sense of reflection or confrontation to those imposter feelings. Because I know that was beneficial for me to deconstruct what those thoughts are, and realizing that I do have the skills, I do have the talents, I do have the capacity and the abilities to hold space in the areas that I am. So how can I provide insight for others to do that same thing? Implications to Unmask the Impostor reflects having self-awareness and acknowledgement of imposter feelings. As clinicians, working professionals, we are, prompted to be multiculturally sensitive anyway. That multicultural competency forces us to be conscious of our awareness, to have some sense of acknowledgement. And then from that acknowledgement of attitudes or having a sense of awareness, it informs our knowledge. And then we become more aware of other cultures or other dynamics that allow us to put those actions or awareness and knowledge into a place of skills and advocacy. So becoming aware of when these feelings are coming up for yourself and for individuals is a very big thing, because what happens if the individual is unconscious to even knowing what imposter feelings may be or how it's showing up in their daily activities. Confrontation. One of my favorite skills in counseling has become confrontation or offering challenges to individuals. I don't like it in my personal life, but in the clinical space, I admire it because it offers a space for the individual to feel extremely comfortable in exploring those unconscious thoughts that they have. And in us exploring those unconscious thoughts, we have to understand the root of the feelings. We have to understand where the family of origin is and how that concept of being an imposter was formed. What birthed that perspective that you're not good enough? What birthed the idea that, all right, well, you don't have skills and abilities that will account for anything in any space that you show up in? Who created that narrative? Implications reflect our interaction and socialization with others that experience imposter feelings. So having group therapy or group encounters. I know when I was in vocational rehab, one of the things that I absolutely loved when my clients came together were job talks, and I really admire their ability to show up for each other and share their experience through their job development. So what does it look like to offer spaces where individuals, like-minded individuals, can socialize with one another and make meaning? Another implication is to implement and utilize mentorship whenever appropriate. So I've had the opportunity of having great mentors that were able to share their experiences of imposter phenomenon to give me some insight or understanding of how mine may have shown up. And then I pass it forward to my students. In the clinical experience, I make sure in every class that I teach, the individuals are very aware of when, all right, do you feel like you missed the mark just because you didn't know the information? Or are you missing the mark? Are you perceiving yourself as missing the mark because you feel like an imposter? And are those imposter thoughts real? Because there's a difference if you just think that I'm sorry, if you think that you suck as a clinician versus these thoughts that you have began to believe in terms of narratives is overtaking your experience with this. There's a difference in that. Using self-disclosure when appropriate to aid understanding of imposter feelings for individuals that you work with. Excuse me. And utilizing a CBT approach to challenge self-deprecating beliefs and thoughts with more realistic affirmations. So the CRC guidelines state that rehabilitation counselors are the only professional counselors educated and trained at the graduate level who possess the specialized knowledge, skills, and attitudes to work collaboratively with individuals with disabilities. Through a comprehensive, unique counseling process, certified rehabilitation counselors help individuals with disabilities achieve their personal, social, psychological, career, and independent living goals. Rehabilitation counselors, excuse me, are the bridge between the individual and self-sufficiency, helping their clients live fully integrated lives. So if that's the context that we have as rehabilitation counselors, we can't separate career from the individual. We can't separate personal experience from the individual. We cannot break away their psychological and their social components and say that we see the whole person. So what do we have to do? We have to treat the entire being. We have to treat the whole person. So would I be doing my due diligence if I acknowledge that this individual is experiencing imposter phenomenon and my focus was to place them in vocational spaces, but I don't take note of that? Am I treating the whole person then? Am I aiding their independent living goals? Because what happens if I place them in a job setting, and as a vocational rehabilitation counselor, when I was in that experience, I have to place them in a job setting, follow them for 90 days, and they're having experiences of imposter feelings. How are they going to keep their job if at the job they're believing that they're not sufficient? They're believing that they aren't knowledgeable enough. They believe that they don't have the skill set. That's counterproductive for them, right? So how can we show up for the individual? Something that we could do is focus on the individual's skills and strengths. We can utilize empowerment and encouragement for them to challenge their cognitive distortions or their negative belief systems. And we can explore and identify if imposter feelings are associated with the individual's barriers, or if they feel like there's another intersection that's impacting that belief of themselves. And we can explore narratives or miracle questions with them. So something that I have done in the past is ask my students or my clients, all right, so I hear you saying that you have, what I hear from you as you share your narratives with me, or as you share your context with me, is that you're experiencing some imposter feelings. In a perfect world, if you could just take off the layers of being an imposter and run after your dream in the way that you would love to, who would that person be? What does that look like? And then I would hear their narrative and inform what this journey looks like with them from that lens. Excuse me, I got a little choked up a little bit. And that concludes our exploration of imposter phenomenon, how we can make meaning of imposter phenomenon, and how it shows up for ourselves and in the rehabilitation space. Are there any questions at this time?
Thank you so incredibly much, Dr. Rattle, for just a wonderful and fascinating and thought-provoking presentation. It does look like we have some questions for you. So the first one being, how do individuals who experience imposter syndrome work towards changing their mindsets and narratives?
I know my students, they probably dream about a lot of the statements that I say when we're in class. I've heard a lot of them tell me, you know, I went home, I tried to get some rest after I did some homework, and I had to wake up in the middle of the night because I heard you in my dream saying, show yourself grace, be gentle with yourself. And that's a narrative that I say to my clients and my students often, because sometimes we're our biggest critic, right? And we believe the narratives, or we believe the actions that we have, right? So a way that I've challenged their narratives or heard their narratives is I give them space in just allowing them to share their vulnerability of what they're feeling as an imposter, because I acknowledge that it shows up differently for everyone. I am an identical twin, okay? I'm very much career oriented, and you know, I want to focus on school, I want to build my business and all of those things, right? While my sister, she is also career oriented, but she's also family oriented, where she's married and she has 2 little boys. And I recognize that her imposter phenomenon shows up in a totally different way than mine does. Mine is career and achievement based, where hers shows up in the lens of being a mom. You know, all right, well, I've never done this before. How do I know that I'm doing what I need to do as a mother? How am I showing up for my children? And just offering a space, even to my sister, where she could share her narrative and being supportive with her in that journey. Or same thing with my clients. I'm starting to recognize that imposter phenomenon doesn't only show up in the capacity of achievement. It doesn't only show up in the capacity of academics and career. And once I recognized that, I found ways to hold space for other people.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. It's like we have another question of how much of the work around imposter phenomenon would you say is spent educating versus kind of addressing the mindset and narrative itself?
I personally do not feel like there's enough literature or enough exposure exploring that in thoroughness. And I think is based on disciplines, and I think it's based on again what people perceive as achievement. You know, I know in crafting this presentation and being conscious of how it shows up for in the spaces that I ascribe to, I don't hear many people talk about with disabilities or I don't hear them talk about how imposter phenomenon is showing up for them. A lot of the individuals that I've worked with have been clients that just wanted talk therapy. And when they come to see me, they're like, I don't know what's going on. I don't feel adequate about anything. And I'm like, huh. So I'm gonna give you context of this phenomenon, right? And you tell me if it resonates with you. And they're like, oh my God, that's what it is. And I think it's a disconnect, or it's frustrating to people where it's, all right, you say I have imposter phenomenon, or I have these feelings of imposter phenomenon, but it's not a condition to be diagnosed. I'm confused. So if this isn't a diagnosable condition, why do I feel this so heavily? Why is this my narrative? So I'm starting to see a lot more people become conscious of it or hear it in the social media and everything. But I think that there are many layers to what imposter phenomenon looks like. And I think it needs to be explored in many capacities rather than just academic and career.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Battle. And there's another question that we have. What recommendations might you have for rehab counselors to find the time in sessions to explore imposter phenomenon, within sessions, whereas, there might be more time likely within sessions for clinical mental health counselors. So
Mhm.
might you recommend that rehab counselors kind of incorporate some time and space?
There was an article that I found while I was doing my dissertation studies, and I absolutely loved that article. Can't remember the name of it right now, but I could give you context of what it looked like. That was some years ago. So the article was based on working with individuals who experienced homelessness. That's what my dissertation was focused on. And they were looking at individuals that had access to vocational rehab services. So they kind of explored how their journey looked in terms of being homeless and the lack of resources that they had in terms of vocational rehab. But I also found another article that talked about what does it look like for us to give that blueprint or obtain that blueprint from individuals to identify what their narrative is and their goal of finding employment is. So essentially that article stated, all right, having a space to understand the narrative, going in, all right, in a perfect world, that miracle question. And I understand that rehab counseling, I had the ability to do my master's as a rehab counselor, and I had the opportunity to get my degree in my doctoral studies in rehab as well. But I also have a strong foundation with clinical mental health. So I figured out how to use skills from clinical mental health and implement it in my role as a rehabilitation counselor. So implementing solution focused counseling by using that miracle question. Hey, I hear that you're interested in a job, and that's the journey, that's the trajectory we're on. And I want to make sure that I'm being effective in helping you in this journey. So I'm hearing these imposter feelings come up, but I'm also interested in knowing, in a perfect world where you had your ideal job, where you had, you know, a sense of consistency with employment, what would that look like for you? What does it look like for you to have a job where you're excited every morning when you wake up and you go there and you're, you know, there's a zeal for you to be present there and make this a long-term commitment? Oh, well, you know, I kind of shortchanged myself in a, you know, an office setting, but I would love to be in an office setting because I really do like computers. All right, well, what's kept you from that? You know, I just feel like I don't know the content and I'm never going to learn it. Well, in my mind, that's going to prompt, oh, imposter thought. Oh, what is that belief system? Why do you think that? Oh, because my mom or my dad always told me I wasn't good with computers. Huh. All right, well, what is your knowledge of computers? So kind of getting some insight about that. And then kind of going back to that, okay, so in a perfect world, it sounds like you would like to work with computers. So then my thought becomes, how do we get you there? Because you just told me what your job goal is. You want to work with computers. You want to be in an office setting, interacting in some way with computers, regardless of whether there's data entry, regardless of whether you're creating invoices for people in some way, shape, or form. That's the job I'm going to place you in, or that's the avenue that we're focusing on now. So allowing them the space to prompting questions and reflections to allow them to give you insight of their blueprint and using that as your model. They've done the hard work for you. They told you what they wanted, you know? So that's how it has been beneficial for me.
Thank you. We have another question as well, Dr. Battle, of you know, how often do you find individuals identifying with several of the different ways imposter syndromes can show up? So, for example, perfectionism, fear of failure, wanting to be a superhero at the same time as procrastination. Do you find that there's a lot of crossover?
Oh, yes. Yes. We're human, you know? There are many layers to us. We have many identities that intersect, you know? I have colleagues that I keep in contact with, and I can hear when we're on the phone catching up, I can hear these layers of, oh man, you know, I'm just trying to show up for all of my students. I'm trying to show up for my clients. So that superhuman kicks in, right? And then oh, I had this presentation I had to do the other day, and it's due on Monday, and I it's just too much. It's just too much to try to balance. I have to go ahead and get this done, but I ain't got no time because I have to show up for all of my kids, and then I have to show up and take them to their practices. But I have to do this presentation. So all of these are starting to layer on top of each other. Sometimes it's okay if you're identifying one of the features of imposter phenomenon, but the reality is that we're human. Again, there may be some layers to it. And it doesn't mean that you're incompetent because you have multiple layers of or subgroups that you're hitting with imposter phenomenon. It means that you become more aware of that. And all right, well, I'm conscious of this now. How do I pivot from this constant rush of having these imposter thoughts or tasks described to me, and how do I take a breath? How do I take a beat to make sure that I'm considering these, I'm acknowledging how they show up, and what does it look like for me to confront it in the moment?
Thank you, Dr. Battle. And it looks like there's another question as well. Would it be possible for attendees to have access to the PowerPoint slides after the presentation?
Yes, that's fine.
Great, thank you. So if possible, we could do is I could get a copy of those from you, and then we can send it out to everybody along with the CEUs and verification of attendance as well.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. And I do recognize we do have some additional questions as well, but just kind of for timing, would it be okay if people followed up with you afterwards via email?
Yes, yes, that's fine.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. And so just to kind of close out for today, we would like to provide our sincerest gratitude and appreciation to you, Dr. Battle, for this wonderful and meaningful presentation on a look beyond what you see, Unmasking the Impostor. Dr. Battle, we're most grateful for you and for your work, for your contributions and advocacy, and for taking the time to share with us today.
Thank you.
For those in attendance, we also appreciate you joining us today, and we would like to invite you to consider joining us for our ongoing Virtual Learning Institute, which is currently taking place within ARCA during the month of May, and it's offering up to 10 CRC and CVE CEs. These are pre-recorded presentations that you can access throughout the month of May. And so if you go onto the ARCA website, you'll be able to register and learn more about the program there as well. We also invite everybody to save the date for our month-long June ARCA Webinar Series, which will take place each Friday throughout the month of June. We'll have 2 webinars each Friday throughout the month. And during the month of June, we'll be offering up to 12 NBCC, CRC, and CVE CEs. More information about the program for that event and the registration can also be found on the ARCA website. We'll also include that momentarily in the chat box as well. So we hope you'll consider joining us for those events too. On behalf of the American Rehabilitation Counseling Association, we thank all of you again. We thank you, Dr. Battle, and we wish each of you a wonderful weekend ahead. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you all.